Oh my goodness. I am so excited today. You guys, I have a special guest on my show. When we met, we started talking, and I said, oh my God, she has to be on the show because one of my favorite TV shows she has a connection with. It's something that I watch religiously every week, and she has a connection, but I'm not going to tell you what it is right now. What I'm going to do is allow Bernadette Thompson, did I say it right?
hmm
I'm going to allow her to share and tell you about herself.
So, my name is Bernadette Thompson, and a little background story. I grew up in New York, just outside the city from a big family, and I live in Vermont now. But recently, I decided I've done something my whole life, which has been ancestry and genealogy. And I started a company called Tell Me Our Story. And it's a genealogy and family history company. And what I do is I'm a researcher, but I focus on the stories of people. So I help people understand the story behind the documents, things that they didn't know about their families. And that really brings me so much joy. So that is what I do now. And I've been doing genealogy and research for about 15, more than 15 years. And so yeah, what I do now.
Yes, and see, now I'm going to share with you the show. It's called Finding Your Roots. And I watch that show religiously. I love it. And the fact that she does things with ancestry, they do the same on the show. So I was like, this was something that God put together because he knows that I absolutely love that show. And so when we were talking and she was telling me some things, my eyes got big and I was like, oh my God, I love this woman already. So, having her as a guest on the show, this is going to be so exciting. So, Bernadette, I know that you listen to my podcast and we talk about stories and you tell people stories. So, what story, when you heard it, you said, this is a story that resonates with me? This is a story that I want to talk about on her show.
So I it's the story of Big Daddy. I mean, it
Ah,
just touched me so much. I have listened to a few podcasts and I was just enjoying them. And then I hit the story about Big Daddy and my heart just went. So yeah, Big Daddy is the story that just resonates very deeply.
I am so glad she chose that story because it really does connect with what she does. Let me share a little bit about the story itself. It's called My Big Daddy. And anybody that knows me knows that I love my Big Daddy. He is probably the reason why I do what I do because my great grandfather, we call him Big Daddy. He was a business owner. He was an entrepreneur. He had businesses. I mean, they own land. Him and his brothers, they own land. And the story I share is about the time that I spent with him. One of the most favorite things that I did with him was he had a beauty shop and a barber shop. I used to hang out there all the time. I mean, anytime that I could go over his house, that's where I wanted to be. Or in the evenings, if he was having dinner or whatever, I would literally like to go and sit at the table because he used to tell us all these riddles and he used to make up stories and riddles and tongue twisters. And I mean, I would sit there, my eyes are bulging, and he's telling me these things. And then sometimes he would have me to say I'm back. I could never get through them without his help. He would always have to help me. But I love those things. He used to take us out in the field and show us, how to grow different vegetables and all that. And I mean, he was so big in my life because he worked for himself. He owned his own business. And from that point, I've always wanted to be my own boss because I'm like, my great grandfather, he did it. Why can't I do it? So yeah, so you need to go listen to it so you can hear the story about my big daddy. He is an amazing man. So, Bernadette, when you listened to the story and you heard it, what were your thoughts when you heard about my big daddy?
Well, one and the biggest thing is I felt myself at the table with you when you were talking about,
Yeah.
where his wife put his food down, his hot food and his coffee, and that he said grace before he, and then he
Yep.
just, and that just resonated with me. It just felt so, I felt a part of it. And our ancestors, I just want you to know, our ancestors are a much bigger part of our lives than we even realize. And we all have a story the story's been woven together from generations to
Hmm.
generations. And so, like listening to your story with the rich details, it helped me understand all of the things that he was teaching you and that
Hmm.
you remember about him. And we don't realize that our ancestors that came before us, while we are connected with them through our DNA, there's also a spiritual connection. And
Yes.
we find the things, it is not surprising when I work with people and they find that they have a deep connection with one of their ancestors, which I think that you have with Big Daddy.
Oh, that is so sweet. Listen, one of the things that I loved about my big daddy, and I'm sure as a little girl, I probably got on people's nerves because my big daddy, great grandfather, my big daddy, he was a deacon in the church. And in our church, the deacon sat on the front row. So whenever I came in church, I would see my big dad on the front row, and I just thought I was the best thing in the world because my dad, my big daddy, he was sitting on the front row of the church. So that meant that he was very important. So I know I got on everybody's nerve, but I just love that about him. Like he's on the front row. He is very important. So yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
I know you can hear it in my voice how much love I have for my big daddy. He was just in my eyesight, he was the best person on earth. He was just so much. And then he birthed my grandma, him, and my grandma. I love my grandma, his daughter. I love her. I look like her. I have a lot of her ways. So yeah. So do you have a story of like one of your family members where you just have this deep it was something about them that just made you just like draw to them.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking about your story, and I actually didn't know any of my grandparents because
Oh,
my father's parents died when he was 5 and 6 years old from tuberculosis. So he was raised by two sets of great aunts and uncles. So they were my grandparents. But the whole story, their story, is just a very special one. But if we're talking about fun grandparents, my Aunt Peg, my great Aunt Peg, who I'm named for because my name is Bernadette Margaret, she was so much fun to go visit because she always had, when you went to her house, she had chocolate bars and Coke.
oh
So
wow.
every time, yeah. So we always wanted, and she was in the neighborhood, so we could walk there. And every time you went to Peg's house, and she also taught me how to play canasta. So we would play cards together. And that was, yeah, I mean, she was just a very special person. And it wasn't until I started doing genealogy that I realized the life that she came from. And it would take a long time to tell all of it, but so my grandmother who passed away, my father's mother, she had five sisters. I mean, there were five sisters altogether. And my Aunt Peg and my Aunt Nan, who raised my dad and his brother, were her two older sisters. And when she died, they took over. So she left these two little boys because her husband died as well, both within 1 year of each other.
Oh
My
wow.
grandfather and my grandmother both died. So Peg and Nan raised my dad and his father. But then looking into their genealogy, I didn't realize that they were essentially orphaned as well. And that my
Oh.
great grandfather, they were living in New York City, and my great grandmother, my great grandfather died of pneumonia, and there were five little girls, and the youngest was one.
Oh
And
my.
Yeah, and they ended up having to, three of the girls had to be taken in and put in an orphanage because that my great grandmother couldn't care for them.
Oh, that's
So
so
when
sad.
I look back and see this fun woman who shared so much of herself, and we had so much fun at her house. She was just a joy to be around. And then to see this deep story that she had, and she kept a log of everybody's birthday
Oh,
and
wow.
things they did. I can go back and tell you what day I made my first communion because she had a little, it was like a calendar, and she would put, it would be whatever year it was on that, May 5th, Bernadette received her first communion. So she was a special lady. And when I started doing our family history, which is over 15 years ago, I felt her spirit helping me.
Mm,
And so much was in her documents that I was able to add to our family story. So
that
it was
is
pretty,
amazing.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
pretty cool, which was also very cool as I did a little bit of research on your family.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, tell me what you found. I want to know. I knew a little bit. What I wanted to say is that your Aunt Peg sounded like she was the historian and she didn't know it of the
Right.
family. And one of the things that I did before my grandmother passed, one Sunday we were sitting around and I start talking to her because I've always loved hanging around older people. I just feel like they're just their spirit, they'll just share anything with you. And she started telling me about her family, who was her what her mother's name was, and who her grandparents' name was. And went home and I wrote it in my Bible because I had a Bible and in front of it, it asks you, you can write
Yeah.
those things down. And I got it from my grandmother before she passed. So from that point, I was so intrigued. So meeting you, and now you found some information about my big daddy. I cannot wait to hear this. So please share, Bernadette.
Well, first of all, it's amazing that you had already made that connection with your grandmother and sitting down. That's how stories are told from
Mhm.
generation to generation. And it really helps us just know who we are. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like it answers the questions, who am I and where did I come from? And that's why it's so important. So you had told me the story when I read about Big Daddy, and then we talked a little and I got a little bit of information and I just wanted to see what I could find out. And I found out a lot of things about, building your family tree, which is the way we save this information. The stories that you got from your grandmother can be saved on that tree.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I started to look, one of the things I wanted to do, because you just told me about this farm
Mhm.
and I was curious when the farm was owned and where this came from. And so because it's interesting to see the history even of land and
Mhm.
where the land has come from and why did we end up there? Like how come we ended up there? So I was looking at Big Daddy, and I wanted also to see if I could find anything about his businesses, but I couldn't find too much about that, but I was able to find the census in 1940, and there's Big Daddy, and he is listed with his wife, with your is a Big Mama? Is that
They
what
used
you
to
call?
call her Big Mama. Now she
Yeah.
died before I was born, so I only know his second wife, but
Oh,
his
that's
first
right.
wife, his first wife was Big Mama.
Yeah, and so, but he was there and with his children, and it said there he was on his own land. He owned a farm. He was a farmer, and I forget exactly, but it was a big farm at that point. It was a big farm, so it was,
Yeah.
um, yeah. I mean, just amazing. So then I decided to go back and see what else I could find. So, the way that you trace somebody back is I would look at what records there were for Big Daddy and find the ones that had his parents. So I was able to find his dad, whose name was John, and
Mm-hmm.
his mom, whose name was Martha. And so I traced them a little bit. And I was able to then go back and find a document that said who John's father and mother were, and their names were Jeremiah and Amy. So now we're talking. So if Big Daddy is your great grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
John would be your great great grandfather, and
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah is your great 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 or three times great grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I found, which I was not surprised to find it because it often is with families that are from the South, families of color that are from the South. I found a document that showed that Jeremiah and John, Jeremiah was the dad and
Mm-hmm.
John was the son, that they were both born enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And it broke my heart. And I knew I had to share it with you. But the documents are just amazing. And it showed that Jeremiah had come from North Carolina. And it was the document I found about him was in 1865. It said that it asked if in 1863 was he free or not, and he said still said he was enslaved at that point. And it listed the plantations that he came from, and it listed the plantations that his wife and children came from, and they were kind of together. So it was an interesting thing to find out. So, and it also listed, so I'm looking at that, and it says that they're now living in Virginia, in the same place that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So and this was in Virginia. So he left North Carolina right in the middle of the Civil War, around the Civil War, and he was freed and he moved to North Carolina. I mean, he moved from North Carolina up to Virginia. And I'm looking at the document and it's saying what they're doing and are they working, and all the way over on the edge under Jeremiah's name, and it's asking what he does. And he says he works for himself.
What? Are
And
you
I was,
kidding me?
so this man had just left North Carolina, where he was not allowed to leave until somebody gave him permission. And he is now living in Virginia, working for himself.
I love it. Are you kidding me? So he was
But
an
then
entrepreneur.
And then I found another document, which was I think it was 1870, somewhere in 1870, that showed that he was a landowner. He had his own farm and he owned it. So he was working
Yes.
for himself on his own farm.
Go Jeremiah. And what it
Yeah,
sounds like is that I have an uncle, my big daddy's brother, his name was, we called him Uncle Jerry, and I believe his name was Jeremiah, so he must have been named after him, which is amazing. Oh my God, I love this. So entrepreneurship is like in the blood, because I have never wanted to work from anyone. And I felt that it came from my big daddy because that's what I saw with him. He owned
yeah.
his own businesses. And so, I've never, and I have worked for other people, but I just never wanted to. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I moved around from job to job. I don't know, but I feel like deep down inside, it was like, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be your own boss.
Well, and I think Jeremiah left when he left Virginia. I believe that he was encouraged. He left with a good sense of self.
Oh,
And
when he left North Carolina and
when
came
he
to
left
Virginia.
North Carolina to come to Virginia,
Okay.
that he left with a good sense of self somehow in all of what he had gone through. He was able to say, I'm going to rise. I'm going to do this, and I'm doing it
Yeah.
myself. And
Yes.
he has left an incredible legacy. And so Big Daddy that came down through that family. So you probably didn't know his daddy, John, died when Big Daddy was only 2 years old. So
Oh,
Big Daddy did not know. So any energy that came through it, but it came through because Jeremiah Jeremiah was living in Virginia. Maybe it's possible that Big Daddy knew Jeremiah. We'd have to look a
oh,
little bit.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
that family has done amazing. And to see you, Miss
yes,
B here,
yeah.
and it's just um and not only you're a woman entrepreneur, you've started something and you have worked so hard at it. I mean, it's just I knowing, having done it myself and started my own business myself, I can feel that kinship. Um, but such love comes through this family.
Yeah, yeah. This makes my heart so warm because like I said, I've always admired him, and it's just like, and he was such a kind person. And even more so now that you shared with me about, his relatives and all that. I think he probably got that kindness from his grandfather, because he, even though during that time that he was, here, he went through a lot, because, it's not like when they came out of enslavement, everybody was best friends, better old pal, and everybody was treated equally. So I'm sure he
Mhm.
went through a lot
Right.
to have everything that he had. But I always remember him as a nice person. I don't remember him yelling or fussing. He always was kind to us. So he didn't let the circumstances of everything that was going around him get to him, bother him, or make him, a mean, bitter person. It probably pushed him to be a kinder and a nicer person because of everything that he did go through.
Yeah, no, it's a sweet story, just in just in what he left you. But you are correct. It could not have been easy. And it could not have been easy. And so um I just think, and the other thing I'll make, as I was going through, and as you research, you look for things like marriage certificates and death certificates, because it helps tell the story. And all of the marriage certificates, all those weddings took place in churches. Just want you to know.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I can't say everyone because I probably haven't looked at them all, but most of the ones that I saw, they were in a church.
yeah, because my grandfather, like I said, he was a deacon in the church. So, he did not play when it come in. Just like in the story when I shared, we sat down and grace was said. And once grace was done, then we went on. So he was a very, him and God was best friends, good old. And he passed it along because everyone, my grandmother, we were raised in the church. So yeah, that was something else that they passed down, that you really need to have a relationship with God. So I love this. This is beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. I love it.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna move on because I can sit and talk to Bernadette. I know she has some other things, some more stuff. We're gonna talk about that later, but thank you for
Maybe
sharing
we'll
what
do
you were
another
eating.
one.
Yeah. So at the end of my stories, I always ask questions. So Bernadette and I, we're going to answer those questions. So, and I think we may have probably already answered them. The first question is, do you remember your grandparents or great grandparents? What is something that you remember doing with them? Something that, you've never forgotten. And you talked about your own peg and
Mhm.
canasta. Oh, I can't say
Canasta, yeah, it was on. I couldn't play it now. It's a card game.
that.
Well, I have one other I will tell you about, my Uncle Bob, which he was also one of the ones that raised my dad. And he was a piano player and he played by ear. He couldn't read music, but we used to go over and he used to play piano for us. And he used to play Roll Out the Barrel, which was this roll out the barrel. And then we would dance the polka in his living room. So that's kind of a fun memory that I have of,
Oh.
yeah,
Yeah.
my Uncle
Well, like
Bob.
I said, with my grandparent, my grandmama, I just remember sitting down having conversations with her. We used to talk all the time, just sitting there talking to her. And of course, Big Daddy, the riddles and the tongue twisters and all that. I, I wish I could remember. My sister is older than me, and she was around them a lot longer than I was, but she couldn't remember. She remembered he used to do them, but she couldn't remember any of them. And I wish I could have, but yeah. So those were some of the things. That was one of the things that I remember with them sitting there talking to grandma, and then the riddles and stuff with Big Daddy. So the next question is, if you have children, do you have any stories, riddles, tongue twisters, or anything like that that you are passing down to them so that they can pass it down to the next generation and the next generation?
So I think I probably don't have riddles or things like that, but teaching them to share stories and to preserve
Yes.
stories. And, one of the things that even looking back, I was able to find the legacy that your great grandfather Jeremiah has left, but they didn't leave stories for the women. Like the women's stories are lost. They were not usually documented as much. So I'm teaching them to love, to understand where they came from, and to save their stories. My daughter now is 33, and she's just become a mom, and she's able to, like she's a working woman, and she's going to pass down that story, of her life to her children. And that's what I'm hoping. And as you should be documenting your story as well.
I am. And one of the things, I don't have kids, but one of the things that I do have is my podcast, which are full of stories.
Yeah.
They're all personal stories, they're all my stories. And a lot of them do have my grandmother. And one of the things that when I started this podcast, I shared with my family and everything. And one of my cousins, he's my second cousin, he wanted to know about grandma, which is Big Daddy's daughter. He wanted to know about her, and he didn't know anything about her. So the podcast helped him to learn about grandma because people weren't telling him and sharing stories. So one day we were at a family reunion. He came up to me and he was like, "Thank you so much." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Your podcast. I didn't know about grandma. And so when I listen to your stories, I'm really learning about grandma through your stories." So he just made me so happy because I didn't realize that that was something that I was doing. So even this particular episode is going to let my family know a little bit more about grandma, Big Daddy, and so forth. So leaving this is something that I'm sure it would go from one generation to the next generation because it's there.
Mhm.
Once you put it out there, it's going to be there for a long time.
Mhm. That's awesome. That's just
Yeah.
awesome.
So thank you so much, Bernadette, for being here. Oh my God, you have been just amazing. I cannot wait to find out more. Um,
Mhm.
so if anyone is interested in doing their genealogy, is that how you say it? Genealogy?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Or, they want to get with you and figure out, tell us where we can find you so we could, if somebody else wants to do this, that they can do it.
So my website is called tellmeourstory.com. And I'm also on Facebook, Tell Me Our Story. I do, if they go to the website, I have a way for them to, if they put in their email, they can download a 6 steps to getting started to learning about, and give people an idea of what the things to start thinking about, of the list, what should they be looking for in their own families to begin to do this process. And then, we have workshops occasionally, and I'm doing a free one on in February. But tellmeourstory.com is where, is the website, and Tell Me Our Story on Facebook is the Facebook page. So they can get more information there.
Perfect. I will make sure I have all of this in the show notes and in the description so that anybody that wants to, they can find you and, hopefully, you can get some clients from this. But personally, I am very grateful to you. I am so grateful that you even offered to look into that for me. And I am even more excited about them the gift that you've given me about Jeremiah Harold being a entrepreneur. That out of everything, I that is like the best thing that for me is just knowing that it's in my bloodline and that, some of my ancestors were entrepreneurs. So I love
Yeah.
it. So thank you again, Bernadette. You have been a jewel.
Mm. I am so grateful to spend this time with you. Just I'm very heart-centered. I just feel it right here. And so thank you.
You're welcome.